You know, I find it hard to believe that this is the 8th and final week of our sermon series in the book of Daniel. I remember when we started this thing, there was still snow on the ground, and it's pretty crazy. But through this sermon series, we have been in Daniel, serving the sovereign God. What we've done is we've looked at this guy, Daniel, and we've seen how this guy and his friends, they were committed to serving God. And we've looked at this God who's sovereign, who's in control of absolutely everything, including the foreign kings and the foreign kingdoms that are in this world. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of recap some of the highlights from our journey through all the book of Daniel. And we're going to see how Daniel, he really fits into this whole book of the Bible. How God really has used this book and how he challenges us in a practical way through these scriptures. That's why today I've entitled, going back, it is Daniel Deja Vu is today's message. Well, let's pray. Lord, thank you for this time. Lord, I thank you for this book. Lord, there is so much wonderful goodness that is in the pages. God, I pray as we have read this, Lord, as we have kind of gone through some of these stories, Lord, these historical accounts, Lord, that you would just remind us of some of these truths, Lord, that you would speak to us afresh today. And we thank you for it. We praise in your name. Amen. On week 1, this was back on April 22nd, we started this. We looked at our very first message, Biblical Backdrop. And we saw how so important it is for us to understand the historical backdrop to the books of the Bible, specifically the book of Daniel. And that historical backdrop was the nation of Israel. They had struggled, and they continue to struggle, and you see this all throughout the Old Testament. They struggled with this ever-wandering heart issue. This is something that today we also can relate to. And Paul, he states this struggle like this. In Romans, chapter 7, verses 15 to 20. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For I am not practicing what I would like to do, but I am doing the very thing I hate. But if I do the very thing I do not want to do, I agree with the law, confessing that the law is good. So now, no longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For the willing is present in me, but the doing of the good is not. For the good that I want, I do not do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. But if I am doing the very thing I do not want, I am no longer the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. Now, as I read that, it just kind of seems, okay, where am I at? What am I doing? And it just kind of seems like a little bit of a tongue twister. But the bottom line to all of this, basically what's being said is, there is a war inside us. It is this tug of war that's happening. So as you kind of see this volleying back and forth, that's the picture that was meant by the writing here. It's this volleying, this tug of war. We know the right thing to do. But we sometimes, if we're honest, we decide to do the wrong thing. And the reason for that is because each and every one of us are wicked, rotten, awful sinners. All of us, we struggle with this. And James, he puts it very blunt in James 4:17. He says, therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. You know, as I hear all this is a kind of really depressing way to start off a sermon. But I want to tell you there's good news through all of this. And I thank God that he doesn't leave us with just that sin problem. That he's done something to remedy this. God knew that we messed up. That we all missed his mark of perfection and holiness. And that we couldn't fix this mess on our own. That's why God sent his only Son, Jesus. The only one in all of history that is able to do, who is able to clean us, who is able to cleanse us from all of our sin, to make us in a right standing before God. He's done this through his death, burial, and resurrection. That is the absolute pure grace of God. We call that the plan of salvation. And he has offered this to each and every one of us. He has offered it to all mankind, and we have to receive it by grace through faith. The question is, will we accept it, or will we reject it? Individually, all of us are going to have to answer that question. Will I personally, individually, on my own free will, accept that free gift of salvation? Or will I reject it? And if you're not sure if you've ever made that decision or where you land on that, please do not leave today without seeing me. There is nothing I would rather talk to you about today, that you may know that you know that you know that you will spend all of eternity with God in heaven. He's loved you so much that he sent his Son. He loved you so much that he wrote you the greatest love letter ever. He wants to spend it with you. Please don't leave today without knowing for sure that you have that relationship. Now, back to the specific trouble that the nation of Israel found themselves in as they're leading into the book of Daniel. What you see is time and time again, Israel, they found themselves wandering from God. They found themselves wanting to do their own thing above what God wanted for them. Again, as I said, you go through Genesis, where you see the origin, the really starting place of God's people, his children. You see it kind of start there, and then you see it all the way through the whole Old Testament, this ever-wandering heart. To help these children of Israel, to help them see their problem, to see this problem that exists because of this wandering heart, God uses foreign nations. He uses the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And these foreign, outside, horribly harsh people come on in, they capture, and they take some prisoners of war with them. And the whole purpose of this is to humble these people, to humble God's people so that they would once again follow God's leading. It was kind of a spanking. It was a timeout of sorts. But Daniel, as we look through his life, Daniel was taken in the first of 3 waves in the Babylonian captivity. He was taken in the year 605 BC, which led us actually to break in to the first chapter of the book of Daniel. And we looked at dashing Daniel. We said that this dude, he was a good-looking guy. On the outside, handsome, rugged, manly man. On the inside, kind of like David is a man after God's own heart, Daniel would have been categorized the same way. We saw in this that Daniel, as I said, he's a good-looking guy. But what you see in all of this, Daniel, when he was taken, it's very interesting to see the timeline in all of this. Daniel was taken at such a young age. It is believed that he was taken roughly at the age of 16. And when he was taken, it's cool to see Daniel, from such a young age, making a commitment, making a decision. He chose to follow the leadership of God. That God was going to be first in Daniel's life. You see this in one of my absolute favorite verses in all the Bible. I love it. When we look at it, it was Daniel 1:8. And the first part of that, it says, "But Daniel made up his mind." Other versions say, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or the wine which he drank. As I kind of have wrapped my head around this, this was kind of like Daniel's life mantra. That he was going to put God, no matter what, first and foremost. That Daniel's direction of his mind, it was set. He was going down this path. But God, He was going to be the number one person in Daniel's life. He was going to be priority one. Numero uno was God in Daniel's life. Now, there's a simple test to kind of check to see where God falls in our life. Just a few questions. What do you spend your time and money on? What do you see, or what do you actually use your talents, the things that God has given you, what do you use those things to accomplish? And ask yourself, is your life really all about bringing glory and honor to God? Matthew, he puts this test in a really cool way. In Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's a pretty summarized statement there. But Daniel, he made up his mind. Daniel, he had purposed in his heart that nothing was going to get in the way of Daniel and his God. That relationship was going to be tight. There was going to be nothing that was going to wedge itself in. FYI, the battle is oftentimes won and lost in the mind long before action ever occurs. It is a battle for your mind. Is God the ruler? Is He on the throne seat of your mind? Do you want to do what's right? Decide so in your mind. Put up guardrails in your life. Guardrails are there to protect you. To sometimes even protect you from yourself. Put up safety nets around you so that you don't fall. But when you do, it's in a safe environment. This includes getting an accountability partner. Someone that you can honestly trust. Someone who is willing to tell you the hard truths, even if it's uncomfortable. You know, as I think about this, it's also incredibly important to know your trigger points. Those areas in your life where you are perhaps more weak than other areas. Protect yourself against them. Guard yourself. And when those areas, they're unavoidable and you're going to have to face them, don't dwell there. Don't linger there. Run. Get away as fast as you can. Don't stay there. Proverbs 4:23. Watch over your heart. Other versions say, guard your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. This led us through our third week. Truth or consequences. Daniel, he was faced with an impossible task. He was to tell King Nebuchadnezzar his dream. And then he was to interpret that dream. Oh, and by the way, if you failed, you're going to be torn limb from limb. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not something that I'm going to be chomping at the bit to sign up for. Like, that's like, yeah, okay. But that's what Daniel's involved in. Two things that really stood out to me from this chapter was, number one, Daniel, he knew his limitations. Daniel knew his limitations. The source to Daniel's success was the one true God of the universe. He knew in his own strength he was not going to be any different than any of the wise men, any of them, the conjurers, the Chaldeans. He was no different. But by the grace of God go I. That's what Daniel knew. He knew in spite of him, God could use him. And God was able to use him and wanted to use him. Second thing that we notice is Daniel. He was a man of prayer. Before action, Daniel, he takes the time to pray. To really get alone with God. To say, hey God, this is what's going on in my life. And he didn't do it all by himself. You notice that Daniel, he kind of goes around and he gets his friends together and asks them to pray for this situation as well, to join him in prayer. And then Daniel, he trusts God to answer those prayers accordingly. Whatever the outcome, God, I trust you. Might not be what I want, God, but I trust you. Might not be the way that I thought it should go, but when it doesn't turn out those ways, I trust you. Because you are there. It's for your glory, and it is for my good. These truths, as you see it, they're evident all throughout the book of Daniel. But before we move on, let's make this personal. How much are we relying on the sovereign God? Are we trying to face life on our own strength? I'll tell you, I look out, I know there are incredibly talented, gifted, wonderfully skilled men and women and teens in this crowd today. But please do not try to do it on your own. Do not try to face things in your own strength. You will fail. It is not enough. You have got to rely on God in all things. When you recognize your limits, you recognize your dependence. And that is where really the Christian life begins. That we truly, honestly need to be 100% dependent on God in everything. Relying on God. Because God is in control. Trust Him with absolutely everything. That guy's trying. Yeah. Dad. Prepare to meet thy Maker. Do you really take advantage of prayer? I mean, like we should. Like we intellectually know we should pray, but do we really take advantage of it? In Sunday school, we've been looking in the book of Colossians. And this is what it says about another guy and another man of prayer. You see it in Colossians 4:12. Epaphras, who is one of your number, a bondslave of Jesus Christ, sends you his greetings. And this is what it says. Always laboring earnestly for you in his prayers, that you may stand perfect and fully assured in all the will of God. That phrase, always laboring earnestly for you in his prayers. This wording, it is so cool when you go back to the original language that it's written in. The Greek there, it has this connection to the work put into athletics. That rigorous daily training of the body. Process it. We are to exercise our prayer. Prayer is hard work. It's time-consuming. It sometimes can be a struggle, but let me tell you, the rewards are incredible, and they are so, so worth it. We serve the sovereign God. He answers prayer. Week 4. We looked at our Mother's Day challenge. Bad bling. Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they trusted God. Now, you're probably familiar with this whole story of the fiery furnace. But to summarize it, there's these three. And these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to bow down to a golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar put up. And because they rejected that, they are cast into a furnace of blazing fire. But it's interesting to remember the bold statement that these three made, answering this question. What God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? And in Daniel 3:16-18, that answer is given. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. That is a powerful statement. That is an awesome thing to be said. Daniel, you think about his life, he associated with committed, strong believers. Look at your own life. Look at your circle of friends. Are they committed, strong believers? Do those friends in your sphere of influence, do those friends challenge you to have a better walk with God? Do we trust God like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Regardless of the outcome, God's good and God can be trusted. The question is, are you, am I willing to let God lead? Are we truly going to trust Him? Week 5, from fame to shame. We start off, I just want to read this in Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. That verse, it summarizes the hard lesson that King Nebuchadnezzar learned. Potentially, when you look at history, King Nebuchadnezzar was potentially the greatest king ever over the Mesopotamia area. That land between the Tigris and Euphrates River. He was probably the best, the greatest king to ever rule. But King Nebuchadnezzar, he started to believe the hype about himself. Pride swept over him. And in Daniel 4:29, he says this, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?" King Nebuchadnezzar's pride, it blinded him to the true source of all things, the God of the universe, the one true God. Yes, King Nebuchadnezzar, he was a great king, and he accomplished so many wonderful, great things, but it was only because God allowed it. God is sovereign. God is in control of everything. After 7 years of learning this hard lesson, listen to King Nebuchadnezzar's change of heart. You see it towards the end of Daniel 4. In verses 34 to 37, "But at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored Him who lives forever. For His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but He does according to His will in the host of heaven, and among the inhabitants of earth. And no one can ward off His hand or say to Him, 'What have you done?' At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. And my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven. For all His works are true, and His ways are just. And He is able to humble those who walk in pride." As I read that, isn't it wonderful that God offers second, third, and sometimes 100th chances? No one is ever too far gone for God to work on, for God to change their life. No one. God's grace still amazes me. Week 6. Week 6, we looked at handwriting on the wall. That famous saying, the handwriting's on the wall, its origin is actually from this Bible story. And it means immediate danger has just become apparent. It is basically just a giant wake-up call. You can kind of picture flashing lights, big arrows, underline, bold. This is what I'm talking about. Daniel 5, 25 to 28. Now this is the inscription that was written out. Many, many tekel of Harrison. This is the interpretation of the message. Many. God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel. You have been weighed in the scales and found deficient. Perez. Your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Now, if you remember this historical event, King Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, King Belshazzar, he is now the one that's on the throne. And King Belshazzar, he's got it in his head that he wants to throw this really awful, wicked party. And eventually, in the course of this gigantic, wicked party, he calls out the gold and silver vessels from the temple that years ago were ransacked and brought to Babylon. He brings out these vessels so that they can desecrate them. This was an act, a giant slap in the face to God. And it is this point that the handwriting appears on the wall. It's like a line is drawn in the sand. King Belshazzar, he had been prideful. And Judgment Day had come. Before we move on with this, I just want to say something. You look around the world, and it seems like there's a lot of people doing a lot of wicked things, and they seem to be getting away with it. And it's hard to process some of this. They don't seem like they have any punishment, but I want you to rest assured, there is coming a day where every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. And I'll tell you this, we love God's patience toward us, but the reason that He doesn't zap everybody with a lightning bolt right now is because God is patient towards them. He is offering that second, that third, that 100th chance to them. The only hope that any one of us ever have is in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It is not your own merit. That's not going to do anything. There's no scale at the end of life where you put your good works on one side and your bad works, and you hope your good works outweigh your bad. That doesn't exist. That's not in the Bible. What you find in the Bible is a God who is gracious. A God who is all-loving and loves us so much that He didn't want any of us to perish. So He sent His only begotten Son, so that we might have life, that we can trust Him with our now, with our eternity, and we can be made clean. Now, I have no idea what you've done in the past. I have no idea what you are currently involved in right now. But I want to tell you, it's not too late to trust God. The handwriting's on the wall, but there's a way of escape. Would you turn to Jesus? Would you ask Him to forgive you? He has promised that He would do so if you ask. Would you ask Him to be the Lord of your life? Because it's not too late. Which brings us in to a couple of weeks ago. What's eating you? We looked at the famous story of Daniel in the lion's den. And in this story, you've got these government officials who had gotten King Darius to sign a law into existence. And this law, it forbid people from elevating a god or a person to the level of esteem, to the same level of esteem as King Darius. And anyone who broke this law, the punishment is that they would be cast into a den of lions. As you look back to the origin of this law, the only reason this law was even ever conceived, it was to trap Daniel, who was a foreigner, who had been elevated to a high position in a foreign land. Daniel, he was a godly man. And Daniel, he set up a daily routine in his life where he would meet with God, where he would spend time alone with God. This was a non-negotiable time in Daniel's life. And as you see in this story, he did it 3 times a day. You could set your watch by the times that Daniel got alone with God. Daniel, he was a godly man. And you see this because Daniel, he loved his God. And Daniel's love for his God, it was so clearly visible to everyone that he came around. It was tangible. You could see it on him. This was something that was just ingrained into who he was. So let me ask, are those things able to be said about us? I truly hope so. I hope when people see you that your daily routine of knowing God better, it is firmly established. That your love for God, when people come in contact with you, they just see it and it rubs off on them. Again, the book of Daniel, it is such a great and marvelous book. The first 6 chapters, they are so practical. They help us to understand how we can live a victorious life in a hostile foreign world. Remember, this place, it's not our home. This is our mission field. We are here with a purpose. We have been given a very clear mission, and that mission is go. A look at Daniel's life, it gives us some practical helps as we strive to serve the sovereign God. We often sing in this church, and we sang it already today, they will know we are Christians by our love. That's a true statement, just in song form. It is my prayer that people around us, that they know the sovereign God that we serve through the way that we love each other, through the way that we talk to others, through the way that we are committed to the God that we love and that we serve. So what? Bringing it all together. Daniel served the sovereign God. He did it visibly. From captivity when he was taken at about the age of 16 to at least the reign of King Darius when Daniel was about 85 years old. Daniel served the sovereign God under 3 notable kings. King Nebuchadnezzar, King Belshazzar, and King Darius. Daniel served the sovereign God during one of the darkest times in Israel's history. A 70-year period of being prisoners of war in a foreign land. Daniel, he chose to serve the sovereign God. Would you be willing to make that same decision? Would you be willing to purpose in your heart? Would you be willing to make up your mind that God is going to be number one? Would you be willing to submit your will to follow God's? Would you make today that day where God is that number one priority? Not just in word, not just in lip service, but in deed and in thought. Daniel, serving the sovereign God. What a privilege that is. Lord, I thank you for this book. And I thank you for Daniel, his life. It's such a challenge to me, Lord. And I pray, God, as we have looked at this book, as we've gone through it, that you would speak to our lives. Lord, that you would just draw us to yourself. Lord, if there be any wicked way in us, Lord, I pray that you draw our attention to it, and I pray that you would work in those areas. Lord, draw us, mold us, make us into what you'd have us to be. Lord, I love that about the Christian life. And none of us are finished products. You're still working on me. I thank you for that. And I praise you in your precious name. Amen.